right, so get ready, because today we are taking a deep dive into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Classic.
A classic. Yeah. You've given us this book along with a bit of background on its impact and even Carnegie's unique teaching style.
Yes, quite a stack of material here.
Our mission to really extract those core principles that can help all of us connect better with people, navigate those sometimes tricky conversations, and ultimately become more persuasive.
Sounds good.
Plus, little did we know, this dive involves a scandalous Kaiser, a disgruntled bronze lion, and a whole lot of cold cream.
Just a few of the surprising stories you'll find in Carnegie's work.
I can't wait. Okay, let's unpack this. You've given us this book on human relations, but what's interesting is the context in which it was written.
Right.
Back then, traditional education didn't really focus on these so-called soft skills.
Yeah, that's right. Carnegie was really ahead of his time in recognizing how crucial these skills are for success in all aspects of life. Back in the early 1900s, he was teaching public speaking, and he realized that people craved something more than just the technical aspects.
They wanted to know how to connect, how to build relationships, how to really make their ideas heard.
Exactly, and this wasn't just anecdotal. A survey conducted by the University of Chicago and the YMCA schools revealed that while health was the primary interest of adults understanding and getting along with others, came in a close second.
Wow, so even back then, people were yearning for those strong connections. They wanted to build friendships, influence people, and really navigate those sometimes complex relationships.
Absolutely.
And Carnegie's own background adds another fascinating layer to this.
It does.
I mean, you're telling me from hobo riding freight trains to successful actor, he ultimately found his true calling in teaching adults.
And he brought this unique blend of public speaking salesmanship and even psychology to his courses, forcing students to speak at every session to build that confidence.
And it worked. Graduates of his courses formed clubs and continued to meet for years afterward, which speaks volumes about the impact he had.
It really does.
Yeah.
It shows how he empowered people to implement these principles in their own lives.
Yeah.
He wasn't just teaching theory, but giving them practical tools for positive change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love that. All right, so let's dive into some of these principles, because I think that's where the real meat of this is, and I think that's what everybody's here for.
Absolutely. So let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get to it.
Now let's dive into some of those core principles that Carnegie laid out for building those relationships.
Okay.
The first one is so simple, yet so profound.
Yeah.
Becoming genuinely interested in others.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads.
Right.
But really, Carnegie emphasizes the power of shifting that focus outward.
Absolutely. And it's illustrated beautifully in that story of the botanist at the dinner party.
Yeah.
Carnegie, despite knowing nothing about botany, listened with such genuine interest that he was labeled a most interesting conversationalist without actually saying much himself.
That's amazing. Just by actively listening, he made a lasting impression. It really highlights the power of focused attention as a form of flattery and connection.
And also allowing yourself to tap into the wealth of knowledge and perspectives that other people have.
Yes.
Think of it as an opportunity to learn and grow from every interaction.
So simple, yet so effective. And then there's the principle we all know and love, the power of a smile. Carnegie tells that heartwarming anecdote about a baby's smile transforming a gloomy doctor's waiting room, showing how infectious it can be.
And, we all know a smile makes a difference, but have you ever considered the psychology behind it? A smile can actually trigger physiological changes in both the smiler and the receiver. It releases endorphins, creates a sense of connection and well-being.
It's like a little shot of dopamine that can instantly shift the energy of an interaction. I even remember reading about Carnegie's phone power program, where he talked about how a smile can actually be heard through your voice, making those phone interactions more positive.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the power of nonverbal communication and how much we convey, even without words. So much of our communication is unconscious. But we can use these principles to shape those interactions in a positive way.
It makes you wonder how much we're consciously harnessing the power of a smile in our daily lives.
That's a great point. It's such a simple tool, but so often overlooked.
Absolutely. Another principle that really struck me was the importance of remembering names.
Yes.
Carnegie highlights Jim Farley, who was said to be able to remember 50,000 names.
Farley had an incredible system. He learned people's full names, family details, their business interests, even political leanings, and then connect those details to their faces. And this came in handy during Roosevelt's presidential campaign, when he could send personalized letters addressing people as Dear Bill or Dear Jane instead of using formal titles.
Wow, that's dedication. It really highlights how something as simple as remembering a name can make someone feel seen and valued.
It goes back to that principle of genuine interest. When you remember someone's name, you're showing them that you care enough to pay attention to that detail, and it creates an instant connection.
Speaking of connection, there's that touching story of Sid Levy and Nicodemus Papadoulos.
Yes.
After years of just being called Nick, hearing his difficult name pronounced correctly brought the man to tears.
It's such a powerful example of how a small effort can have a huge impact on someone's sense of self-worth. It's about acknowledging and respecting individuals for who they are, and their name is a fundamental part of that identity.
It's a reminder that those small gestures of respect can go a long way. Now, building on that idea of respect, Carnegie's fourth principle really emphasizes the importance of being a good listener and encouraging others to talk about themselves.
And this is where active listening becomes so crucial, even when we're faced with anger or criticism. Remember the New York Telephone Company example? They had this raging customer who finally calmed down simply by being given the space to vent their frustrations.
It's amazing how often we just need to feel heard. It reminds me of Mr. Detmer's approach with that disgruntled customer. He actually thanked the customer for the complaint, took him to lunch, and completely turned the situation around.
What's so fascinating about these examples is the power of validation.
Yeah.
By acknowledging someone's feelings, even if you don't agree with them, you create an environment for open communication and de-escalate the conflict.
It's like that saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Exactly. And once you've taken the time to understand the other person's perspective, you're in a much better position to communicate your own ideas effectively.
Speaking of communicating effectively, Carnegie's next principle focuses on the importance of talking in terms of the other person's interests.
Yes, and he illustrates this with a story of how he convinced a hotel manager to reduce a rent increase, not by pleading his own case, but by focusing solely on the manager's interests and benefits.
It's such a brilliant example of shifting the perspective from what's in it for me to what's in it for you.
Right.
You know?
And it's a powerful technique in negotiation and persuasion. By highlighting the benefits to the other party, you create a win-win scenario that's much more likely to lead to agreement.
Absolutely. And it can be applied in so many different areas of life, not just business deals. It reminds me of Mike's approach to motivating that gas station manager. Instead of criticizing the station's appearance, he took the manager to see a sparkling, clean, modern station, and that sparked a desire for improvement, not resentment.
That's a great example of the power of inspiration over confrontation.
Yeah.
By showing someone what's possible, you ignite their motivation in a way that criticism never could.
It's about appealing to their aspirations and helping them see the potential for positive change.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final principle in this section.
Okay.
Making the other person feel important and doing it sincerely.
Yeah.
This goes beyond simple flattery. It's about recognizing and appreciating the unique value that each person brings.
Carnegie tells the story of John D. Rockefeller praising an employee who had just lost the company $1 million.
Wow.
Instead of focusing on the loss, Rockefeller highlighted the employee's past successes and positive qualities.
That's remarkable. It shows how focusing on strengths, even in the face of setbacks, can build confidence and foster a culture of growth.
It's about creating a supportive environment where people feel valued for their contributions.
And speaking of valuing contributions, there's that heartwarming story of blind Stevie Morris and the teacher who recognized his unique ability. Her sincere appreciation gave him a sense of purpose and contributed to his successful career. It's a powerful reminder that everyone has something valuable to offer.
Okay, so we've talked about building relationships, but what about winning people over to your way of thinking? That's where things get a little more strategic, right?
Well, Carnegie's approach to persuasion isn't about manipulation or trickery. It's still rooted in respect and understanding.
Right. He kicks things off with the principle we could probably all benefit from, remembering the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it altogether.
Yeah, he shares that anecdote about mistakenly correcting a Shakespeare quote at a dinner party, and his friend wisely told him, "Why prove to a man he is wrong? Always avoid the acute angle."
So true. Sometimes being right just isn't worth the damage it can do to a relationship.
Right. It's about choosing your battles wisely and recognizing that harmony and connection are often more valuable than winning an argument.
And even if you do find yourself in a disagreement, Carnegie stresses the importance of showing respect for the other person's opinions and never outright saying, "You're wrong."
Yeah, he tells the story of a salesman who used to argue with prospects constantly, but then he learned to agree with them initially, gently steering the conversation toward his product's benefits. It's a subtle shift, but it makes a huge difference.
It's about finding that common ground and building rapport before introducing your own perspective. You're not dismissing their viewpoint, but rather acknowledging it before presenting your own.
Exactly. And it makes the other person feel heard and respected, which makes them much more open to hearing what you have to say.
But what happens when you're the one who's wrong? Carnegie doesn't shy away from that. His advice is to admit it quickly and emphatically.
He shares a powerful story from one of his classes in Hong Kong about a man who reconciled with his estranged son after years of conflict. It took immense courage for him to overcome cultural barriers and admit his fault, but it ultimately healed that relationship.
That's a beautiful example of how humility can be such a powerful force for reconciliation. It's about letting go of our ego and prioritizing the relationship.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, but it can be so incredibly rewarding.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Carnegie also highlights the importance of starting interactions in a friendly way.
Right. He uses the example of John D. Rockefeller Jr. calming down a mob of striking miners instead of meeting their anger with force. He addressed them with respect, acknowledged their grievances, and ultimately won them over.
Wow, a masterclass in de-escalation.
It really is.
It reminds me of that saying, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
So true. By choosing empathy and understanding, you can disarm even the most heated situation and open the door to dialogue.
Now, getting people to say yes, that's the goal, right?
Right.
Carnegie suggests getting them saying yes, yes immediately. It's about finding points of agreement early on to create a more receptive atmosphere.
Yeah, we see this in Dean Woodcock's handling of a skeptical photographer. Instead of arguing, he agreed with the photographer's initial perception, then calmly explained the situation, further easing that tension and fostering understanding.
It's so counterintuitive, but it works by acknowledging the other person's perspective. Even if you don't fully agree, you're disarming their resistance and creating a space for them to consider your viewpoint.
And once they've said yes a few times, they're much more likely to keep saying yes. It's like building momentum toward agreement.
Okay, this one really intrigued me. Carnegie suggests letting the other person do a great deal of the talking.
He has this almost comical anecdote about a salesman who lost his voice and ended up securing a large order simply by listening to the company president talk about his product.
Wow, it's the ultimate let them sell themselves strategy. But on a deeper level, it highlights the power of active listening. By asking questions and truly paying attention, you gain valuable insights and allow people to reach their own conclusions, which makes them much more likely to buy into the idea.
Absolutely. It's about guiding the conversation, not dominating it.
Exactly. And this ties into the principle of letting the other person feel that the idea is theirs.
Right. Carnegie tells the story of Adolf Seltz, a sales manager who wanted to improve his team's performance. Instead of dictating changes, he asked his team what they expected from him and what he could expect from them, creating a sense of shared ownership and responsibility.
It's brilliant. You're not imposing your ideas, but rather inviting their input and making them feel like active participants in the process.
And this leads to greater buy-in, more creative solutions, and ultimately a more harmonious and productive team.
Now, one of the most fundamental principles, I think, is trying to honestly see things from the other person's point of view.
Carnegie shares his own experience trying to stop boys from starting park fires. His initial approach, threatening them with jail time, completely backfired. It wasn't until he connected with them, understood their desire for a campfire, and offered an alternative location that he was able to achieve cooperation.
It's a powerful reminder that understanding motivations and perspectives is key to finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
Absolutely, it requires empathy and a willingness to step outside of our own limited viewpoint.
Building on that, Carnegie also stresses the importance of being sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires.
He tells the story of getting a scathing letter from a colonial dame after he mistakenly said Louisa May Alcott lived in Concord, New Hampshire. His initial reaction was to fire back a response, but he wisely chose to empathize with her perspective and avoid escalating the conflict.
It's a valuable lesson in emotional intelligence sometimes. Choosing understanding over retaliation is the wisest course of action.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique experiences and perspectives that shape their worldview.
And it's about respecting those differences even when we don't agree with them.
Now let's talk about appealing to nobler motives. This goes beyond self-interest and taps into those higher values that drive people's actions.
Carnegie shares the example of Cyrus H.K. Curtis, the owner of the Saturday Evening Post, who wanted Louisa May Alcott to write for his publication. Instead of simply offering her a hefty sum, he offered to donate her payment to her favorite charity, appealing to her altruistic nature.
Such a brilliant example of framing your request in a way that aligns with someone's values and creates a win-win situation.
It's about finding that point of intersection between your goals and their aspirations.
Now, sometimes you need to make your ideas really stand out. Carnegie talks about the importance of dramatizing your ideas to make them memorable and engaging.
That reminds me of the salesman who dumped 32 jars of cold cream on a client's desk to illustrate the competitor's market share talk about a visual that sticks.
Yeah, it's about using storytelling visual aids or any other creative technique to capture attention and make your message resonate.
It's about going beyond the dry facts and figures and creating an experience that people will remember.
And finally, there's the power of throwing down a challenge, tapping into that innate desire to excel and prove oneself.
Carnegie tells the story of Charles Schwab motivating his mill workers by simply writing a 6 on the floor representing the previous shift's output. It sparked a competition to beat that number and production soared.
Such a simple but effective way to tap into people's intrinsic motivation and inspire them to reach their full potential.
It's about setting the bar high and giving people the opportunity to rise to the occasion.
So as you can see, Carnegie's principles of persuasion are less about manipulation and more about understanding human nature. It's about connecting with people on a deeper level, finding common ground, and inspiring them to action.
Now moving on to leadership, which really builds upon all of these principles, Carnegie starts by emphasizing the importance of beginning with praise and honest appreciation.
We see this in Abraham Lincoln's letter to General Hooker, before addressing any shortcomings. Lincoln starts by praising Hooker's strengths and past victories. It's a masterful example of how to deliver constructive criticism in a way that builds up rather than tears down.
It's about acknowledging the good before addressing areas for improvement. This creates a much more receptive atmosphere and makes the feedback easier to digest.
And it shows that you truly value the person and their contributions, even when they've made a mistake.
Absolutely. Carnegie also talks about calling attention to people's mistakes indirectly.
Right. He shares an anecdote about a bank manager who needed to address a teller's difficulty balancing the cash drawer instead of directly criticizing her. He started by praising her other strength and her overall value to the bank before gently addressing the issue.
It's about preserving their dignity and focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on mistakes.
Exactly. And it also demonstrates your trust in their ability to improve.
Now, this one's so important, especially for leaders. Carnegie suggests talking about your own mistakes before criticizing others.
He tells the story of a vice president who angrily criticized a supervisor, creating resentment and defensiveness. If he had acknowledged his own contribution to the problem, the outcome would have been very different.
It's about leading by example and showing that you're not above making mistakes. It creates a more collaborative and supportive environment where people feel comfortable acknowledging their own shortcomings and working together to find solutions.
And it's also about taking responsibility for your actions, which builds trust and respect.
Carnegie also advocates for asking questions instead of giving direct orders.
Right. He points to O.N.D. Young's leadership style. Young was known for offering suggestions and inviting input rather than dictating tasks. This empowered his employees, fostered a sense of ownership, and led to greater creativity and innovation.
It's about treating people like intelligent individuals capable of making their own decisions. It's much more effective than simply barking orders.
Absolutely. And it creates a more engaged and motivated workforce.
Carnegie also highlights the importance of letting the other person save face even when they've messed up.
Remember that story of the woman who completely bombed a presentation? Her boss could have criticized her performance, but instead he focused on her inexperience and offered support and guidance. This allowed her to regain her confidence and learn from the experience without feeling humiliated.
It's such a powerful reminder that everyone makes mistakes, and the way we respond to those mistakes can either build people up or tear them down.
It's about creating a culture of support and growth, where people feel safe to take risks and learn from their experiences.
Absolutely. And speaking of growth, Carnegie stresses the importance of praising even the slightest improvement and praising every improvement.
He tells a story about a mechanic whose work had been slipping. Instead of reprimanding him, the manager reminded him of his past successes and expressed confidence in his ability to get back on track. This encouragement reignited the mechanic's motivation, and his work improved dramatically.
It's about recognizing effort and progress, no matter how small. It creates a positive feedback loop that inspires continued growth.
Absolutely, and it shows that you believe in the person's potential, which can be incredibly motivating.
Carnegie also talks about giving the other person a fine reputation to live up to.
We see this in the story of Tommy, the troublesome student. His teacher decided to label him a natural leader. And this simple shift in perception transformed his behavior. He started acting like a leader because he believed he was one.
It's amazing how our beliefs about ourselves can shape our actions.
And it's a powerful reminder that our words have the power to build people up or tear them down.
So as a leader, it's important to choose those words carefully and to set high expectations while offering support and encouragement along the way.
Exactly. And finally, Carnegie suggests using encouragement and making the fault seem easy to correct.
This reminds me of Lowell Thomas encouraging Carnegie to play bridge. He focused on Carnegie's strengths and made the game seem easy to learn, which boosted his confidence and made him much more willing to give it a try.
It's about breaking down those mental barriers and making challenges feel achievable. It's about instilling confidence and empowering people to step outside of their comfort zones.
Wow, what a journey. We've covered so much ground today, from the power of a genuine smile to the art of letting others win a guest. Carnegie's principles offer timeless guidance for building relationships, navigating difficult conversations, and becoming more persuasive and effective leaders.
And remember, we focused on how to influence others, but what about influencing ourselves? Can we use these same principles to overcome our own negative habits or limiting beliefs? That's something to ponder as you go out and implement these principles in your own life.
Such a great question to leave our listeners with. This deep dive has given you a powerful toolkit for improving your interactions with others. Now it's up to you to put these principles into practice and see the difference they make. Thanks for joining us.